The Pokemon games do not tell us much about the geography or the politics of the Pokemon world. We know the Kanto and Johto regions neighbor each other, we know the Sinnoh region is to the north of them, and we know that the Alola region is pretty much far from everything else, and I think that's all that we know concretely about geography. Some other hints have been given in the past, but they're not always reliable, like the depiction of the planet in the animation for Seismic Toss. It's not consistent across every game. We can glean some more by looking at the real-world counterparts of these fictional places, but that's controversial. Lots of people imagine the Pokemon world as an independent fantasy world rather than as a version of our own, and so what we know about our world wouldn't really apply in that case. That's not how I see it, and early Pokemon games had a ton of references to real places, but those have been slowly phased out over the years, so it's hard to judge. We know even less about the political structure of the Pokemon world. I think the only canonical references that we have to government are that Drayden is the mayor of Opelucid City, although we don't really see much of how that role works or what it means in the context of the Pokemon world. And Hau'oli City Hall, which shows us some of the bureaucracy of local government, but again, doesn't really tell us much about the greater political structures of the Pokemon world. But there is some more that we can learn by examining some very specific word choices. This video is number 3 in a series analyzing various aspects of the Pokemon world through a linguistic lens. I do recommend you watch the first 2 videos before going into this one. It'll give you a good foundation, but if you're short on time, it's not essential. There are 3 terms that can give us some insight into the geopolitical structures of the Pokemon world. Region, national, used in the context of the National Pokédex, and international for the International Police. That last one, international, unfortunately, it doesn't tell us very much because it's only used in the name of the International Police, and we don't know that much about them either. So all it does is imply the existence of multiple nations, which is something. It's interesting, but it's a bit too vague to really be useful. Region also has a little bit of vagueness to it, but it's a lot more interesting. The Japanese term is Chiho, which means region. But at least here in the West, we don't have a very specific idea of what a region is, at least not in the same way that we understand what a country or a nation is.
I think region is really interesting, but also like a good choice for what it's doing because it doesn't have sort of political boundary connotations to it.
Here's Kara again, our guest linguist for this series.
It does feel like the sort of terminology you would run into in a birding book, a field guide of American birds or North American birds, because it would also be North American birds, right? You know, it's you can't say, oh, these birds stop at the boundary between the US and Canada, because they do not care about the boundary. And so you're going to talk about regions in like the Pacific Northwest in a more general term. Japanese regions are often linked to islands and sort of like northern parts of an island and southern parts of an island. So you could probably be like, oh yeah, I might pick up the birds of the Kanto region, just like I might pick up the Pokemon of the Kanto region. The choice of region is a good choice because it allows you to avoid like thinking about political boundaries and things like that. The lack of connotations is one that opens up the world for each person to sort of experience it differently and not bring in extraneous baggage that you have from other translations, right? So like if you used state, you know, state means a lot of things to a lot of people, and you know, some people, a lot of American readers cannot get out of the American meaning of state, right? It is a very specific meaning, and the idea of like the nation state as sort of a general thing is very confusing because it's not like what Americans think of as states. Things like, you know, province and principality and you know, prefecture all imply a sort of a governmental hierarchy or some kind of political organization, and you don't necessarily need that when you're just thinking about Pokemon.
The vagueness of the term region, at least to our Western ears, does cause some confusion when we're interpreting the Pokemon world. Some people think the Pokemon regions are equivalent to countries, other people think they are equivalent to states or provinces, that used to be me. And if we look at what areas of the real world the regions are based on, it gets even more confusing. We have regions that are based on relatively tiny areas like Unova, which takes from barely more than the metro area of New York City, all the way up to Galar, which is pretty much all of England and Scotland. But that very vagueness is doing work too. It hides, or at least it avoids, talking about geopolitical borders. People often think of the Pokemon League as the administrative body of Pokemon regions, even though that's never established in canon. But that idea doesn't work super well for Kanto and Johto since they share a Pokemon League. But really, that's kind of irrelevant, because Kanto and Johto are just geographical regions. Political borders are not being represented in the Pokemon games. I still don't think that the Pokemon League should be considered a governing body, but I also don't think that two regions sharing a league counts as evidence against that. We do get some level of political hierarchy from the term National Pokédex. In Japan, the Pokédex is known as Pokémon Zukan, Zukan meaning illustrated reference book or field guide. The National Pokédex is Zenkoku Zukan, Zenkoku meaning the whole country. So the National Pokédex is the nationwide field guide, a reference book with information about the entire country. This terminology made perfect sense for the first 4 generations of Pokemon because all 4 regions were based on parts of Japan. Kanto is the Kanto region, Johto is the Kansai region, Hoenn is Kyushu, and Sinnoh is Hokkaido. So it made perfect sense to group those 4 areas under the same Pokédex. It was in the 5th generation that things started to get complicated. Unova was the first region based on not Japan. The vast majority of the Pokemon native to Black and White were completely new, and yet we still have a national Pokédex that includes all of the Pokemon from those Japanese regions.
The thing about national, which is really interesting, is national is a really common word in Japan. They love to use it for tournaments and all sorts of different things. But the idea of whether it's only the Pokemon within the nation or if it's funded by the government, both meanings show up in national for us. So we can't say, oh, it's the Pokédex of all the Pokemon of this nation. In fact, it's probably not. It's probably a Pokédex that is funded by the government. And that might be a way of theorizing it. Of course, because the government itself makes nearly zero inroads onto the actual gameplay, it's only it can only be hypothesized.
Has anyone talked about this before? I know that in the past I always understood it to mean that every region that shares a national Pokédex is part of the same nation, even if they're not geographically continuous. French Guiana is part of France, even though it's in South America. But that doesn't have to be the case. If we look at sports leagues in the US, the parallels are quite obvious. Despite being the National Basketball Association, the 2019 NBA championship went to the Toronto Raptors. Despite being the National Hockey League, 7 of the 31 teams in the NHL are Canadian. The US and Canada are not the same nation, and yet they play in 2 of the same leagues with national in the title. Or at least 2. I don't know, maybe there's more. So even though we've only ever seen one national Pokédex, because all of the incarnations of the National Pokédex use the same numbering system, we don't have to assume that all of the regions that have a national Pokédex are part of the same nation. It could just be that Unova and Kalos have a good relationship with the Pokemon version of Japan, so they offer a unified field guide. Maybe Alola and Galar aren't included in Japan's National Pokédex program because they haven't fully adopted the Japanese league system? It's really amazing how many doors you can open just by reframing your understanding of one word. Kara shifted my perception of the word national, and now not only does the National Pokédex make way more sense, but I've completely changed my understanding of Pokemon World geopolitics. I hope that I was able to do the same for you. If you have any other thoughts on Pokemon geography or politics, leave them in the comments. I hope you're enjoying this series so far because there are still 2 videos left. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all of the Libras who support me through Patreon or YouTube channel memberships, especially luxury patron Ethan from Chicago. I'll see you in the next chapter.